Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, one of the civic partners for this show. Today we have Heather Sullivan-Catlin in the studio to talk with us about the St. Lawrence County Community Food Security Assessment she undertook in partnership with GardenShare. Heather is a professor of sociology at SUNY Potsdam, where you also serve as the faculty liaison for service learning. Your primary areas of work in sociology are family and community, and she's long been associated with GardenShare, which is a not-for-profit community food security organization. She served as the president from 2008 to 2013 and is currently active with North Country 350 Alliance, which is an organization working for global climate change and sustainability. Rather on it, not for it. Heather, according to a new Hunger in America report from the organization Feeding America, 46.5 million people in this country rely on food assistance programs to survive. 1 out of 5 families who needs assistance includes a current or former member of the military, and 40% of those households also include a child. Despite this need, food assistance programs like SNAP have been hit with massive cuts in recent years, and many people aren't even told they're eligible for benefits. Hungry people are turning to food charities to find enough to eat, but those programs are also stretched far beyond their capacity. In fact, many of these charities are so overextended that 1 in 6 is worried that they may have to close their doors. The authors of Hunger in America explain that more than 50% of families who use food assistance are forced to eat sometimes expired food, 35% may have to sell belongings in order to eat, and almost 80% have to buy cheap, unhealthy food just to survive. So that's the picture nationally. You were the lead author and researcher on the St. Lawrence County Community Food Security Assessment, which looks at the extent of hunger in our county community, the barriers to food access, and the resources available to residents who are in need, and places and in need in places. And your findings are also done locally, but in connection with the larger context of the situation nationally. And the findings reveal a diverse set of challenges for local families, and the typical rugged North Country resourcefulness that this area is also known for. So let's take a look at some of the information that you surveyed, what you found, and some of the conclusions you were able to address. So what was the impetus for the survey? And tell us a little bit about why you did what you did and your methodology.
Okay. Well, I got interested in food security as part of my larger interest as a sociologist in social inequality and social justice. And when I started teaching at SUNY Potsdam in 2000, I began using a technique of teaching called service learning, where students go into the community as part of a course, work on some kind of community issue that's tied into the curriculum. And I taught then my introduction to sociology class with a theme of food, hunger, and poverty. And so my students were going to neighborhood centers, Meals on Wheels, programs like that. And I really started to get to know what was happening locally, and I was invited then by the founder of GardenShare, Phil Harnden, who had just recently gotten the organization going. And so since about 2001, I have been involved with GardenShare and learning about the programs and ways to address community food security issues. When I arrived in Potsdam in 2000, there was a little bit of farmers market activity, not a lot. There was one CSA operating. There wasn't a lot of awareness about the local foods movement and its importance for access for people and so on. And so over the past decade and a half almost, GardenShare and other organizations and folks have been working on building up a local food system, greater sustainability, as well as access for low-income families to those resources. But we realized that we needed to do more, and in order to do more, we needed more information. And so that that was the impetus for me using the USDA's Community Food Security Assessment model to gather data about St. Lawrence County. And in the lead up to that, I worked not only with GardenShare, but also I met with Chris Radiz, who's the Commissioner of the Department of Social Services in St. Lawrence County. I met with Daisy Cox, who is the director of the Neighborhood Center in Potsdam, but she has worked at several others and really has a feel for the whole county on these issues. And they provided input to me in particular on the survey that I conducted as part of the study. And I think we'll probably, are we coming back a little bit later for more details about the survey?
Will.
So
We will.
I'll hold off on the methodology.
One thing I'd like to know is, this is a survey that you designed specifically for St. Lawrence County. Are these kinds of surveys done on the grand scale, or are they also done for other places like counties and localities? So this is this a unique or not unique examination of the local situation?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
So the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, created a toolkit for conducting community food security assessments. And it's a really wonderful resource. You can do community food security assessment at multiple levels. In this case, I decided to focus on the county for a variety of reasons. But there have been community food security assessments done regionally in different areas, focusing in on individual cities. And much of the data that I drew upon, apart from what I collected in St. Lawrence County, comes from data that's collected at the national level. So for example, there's a set of questions in my survey that are community food security assessment questions that are asked of a sample of Americans every year by the U.S. Census Bureau in their, I can't remember exactly the name, one of their community surveys. So I was able to take the national and state data on some of these questions to create the larger context for what I found in St. Lawrence County.
Okay, good. I know that last February, SUNY Canton did a forum on poverty, and I was fortunate enough to be asked to moderate that, and so we had a variety of speakers who were talking about various aspects of poverty, food being one of them. And Mary Ann Ashley, the mayor of Canton, was representing a community. And one of the things that she talked about was discovering how much need there was in her community, which she was not aware of before she began to research it, to be on that panel. So clearly, this is very important information at not only the county but the community level to really find out what the need is and then create the systems to support that need. So your survey looked at the socioeconomic food security profile here in the county. So the first thing you looked at was the state of poverty and unemployment. What did you find?
Well, I think a lot of people are aware that St. Lawrence County suffers more from these problems than New York State as a whole and perhaps even nationally. But let's put some numbers on that. New York State is around the same average as the U.S. as a whole with the poverty level, with about 16% of the population being in poverty. Now let me put that into a little bit of a historical context. When the U.S. started gathering this data, when poverty levels, but before the war on poverty, when we were really starting to tackle this, about 22% of the population was in poverty. And over the course of a few decades, with a lot of policies implemented in the war on poverty, we were able to get that poverty level down to a low of 11% nationally in the 70s. Now it's been creeping up since then, and we're now around 16%. And the recession definitely really kicked that up because we were around 12% until the early part of the last decade. So Where is St. Lawrence County in that? Well, we are almost 20% of folks in poverty. And one of the things that it's important for people to understand about the poverty level statistics is that they are an undercount of the actual experience of poverty. Because the way we measure poverty is based on what is now really an archaic measure. It was developed in 1959. And it was developed with the idea that in order to not be in poverty, you need to be able to afford to eat. And so the researchers looked at how much the average family was spending on food. And at that time, it was about 1/3 of their income. The average family spent about 1/3 in the 50s on food. And so they took that, calculated the cost of a bare bones diet, a subsistence diet, not a diet to live on robustly, but just to get by, a survival diet, and multiplied that by 3. So the cost of that diet times 3 is what established the level of income that you would need to not be in poverty.
And that hasn't changed since the late 50s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what has changed, most significantly, the average family now spends less than 1/6 of their income on food, not 1/3. Much to people's amazement, probably, food is actually incredibly cheap in our society. We pay very little for food compared to most of the people on the planet. But in addition to that, a lot of other costs have become routine and exorbitant by comparison that weren't even there then, like childcare, like healthcare, and transportation. These things have not been balanced out. So when you hear 19% of people in St. Lawrence County are living below the poverty level, you have to think these are the people who are really in dire straits. And that the people who are slightly or even moderately above that are still really struggling.
And there's two things we know that also complicate that. When it comes to unemployment, that also is a false indicator because there's lots of people who are not counted in the unemployment numbers. So it's actually, the real unemployment is much higher. The other thing is that we no longer include food or energy costs in the cost of inflation. So, you know, if you can figure out how to live without food and energy, then I guess you're doing okay. But for everybody who can't figure that out, that's another way that the numbers are really falsified.
Exactly. And what are they? Right now, unemployment in the U.S. and New York State is around 9%. Which means almost 1 out of every 10 people who wants a job is able to be working. And as you said, it's an undercount. Cannot find one. In St. Lawrence County, it's almost 11%. So again, we're above the averages. And with the recent recession, one of the things that occurred with unemployment rates is you got a lot of what are called discouraged workers. And so the people who just either just gave up looking for employment are not counted in these numbers. But also what's not accounted for in unemployment numbers are people who are underemployed, people who are you know, working far below their education level, for example, or just very part-time when they really need a full-time income.
That's right. One thing that we need to define for people is what food insecurity is, which is different than poverty.
Yes.
And it affects a different group. It affects all of the people in poverty, but it also affects a different group of people outside of the, as you say, the traditional poverty statistics.
Yeah, and I'm going to read from a quote, a definition that I really like, but at the bare bones level, our country has gone from talking about people being hungry to being food insecure. And this is important. One of the reasons for that is that a lot of the people who are food insecure aren't actually hungry. Like, oh, I'm hungry for dinner, or whatever, you know. But they don't know where their food's coming from. They don't have adequate food. And the way we measure hunger or food insecurity, you can't really measure hunger per se. So A basic definition is just limited or uncertain access to adequate food. And when we talk about how they measure some of these things, we'll talk about that a little bit more. But in the community food security world and literature, there's a much more robust definition that takes a lot of other things into account that are important to us. So I'm going to read this. When you have community food security in a community, all community residents can obtain a safe, culturally acceptable, nutritionally adequate diet through a sustainable food system that maximizes community self-reliance and social justice. So there's a lot more going on than just people are getting calories. Mm-hmm. And this ties into this paradoxical thing now that's being called diabesity, right? Mm-hmm. Low-income, poor folks are disproportionately likely to actually be overweight. That's not a symbol of hunger as we would consider it. It is a symbol of inadequate access to safe nutritional diets. And the rates of diabetes and obesity that are affecting these people are a reflection of their food insecurity.
And one of the things we know that for example, in Europe, where food costs a whole lot more, their healthcare costs are proportionately less. We have low food costs, but very high healthcare costs. So there's a definite correlation there. Another thing that you talk about in your report are food deserts. And that's another key to understanding the access side of the food and the hunger problem.
Yeah, and this is wrapped up with income issues as well. Just to add one more thing about food insecurity as a segue into this, in general, when research finds food insecure people, I think this is at the national level, 57% were actually above the federal poverty level. So the relationship between poverty and food insecurity is that poverty generally doesn't even measure all the people who are food insecure. In my study in St. Lawrence County, food insecure households, 1/3 of them had income 2 times the poverty level. So they were at 200% of the poverty line in terms of income, but still were suffering from a variety of the conditions of food insecurity. Now, some of the conditions of food insecurity have to do with access. And the way food deserts are calculated, basically a food desert is an area where people don't have good access to a grocery store, in a nutshell. And there's different ways that these are calculated. And if you go to my study online, and you can find it at GardenShare.org, you'll see little maps that show St. Lawrence County and different levels of food deserts. But they're calculated combining poverty rates and distance from major grocery stores. St. Lawrence County has 8 census tracts that met this definition. And more than 10% of St. Lawrence County meets the definition for low access to stores. So food deserts combine with income. Access, grocery stores, transportation, these are all factors that play the role in that here.
For a lot of our rural communities who aren't next door to a major community with a choice of grocery stores, you're talking about going to a gas station to pick up some basic staples, and then again that brings into the transportation. Do you buy gas or do you buy groceries? And you're not really buying groceries at those places. So, and certainly not, you don't have access to fresh things, fresh food at all in those places. So it really does complicate, where you live complicates this whole picture quite a bit, doesn't it?
It does.
Now, you mentioned earlier that when you first came here that we didn't have a lot of farmers markets and farm stands and things like that, and that GardenShare has been very instrumental in helping to build that process. But we seem to have a pretty robust program, at least during the growing season, in terms of access to fresh food, and there's more and more opportunity to buy, for example, like meat directly from the grower through some of these programs. So when you were doing your study, what did you find in terms of that access? How good is that picture at least part of the year?
Well, I looked at all the different sources of food and found some different trends that were interesting. In the traditional retail sector, we've actually lost some in terms of the number of stores. That has gone down. If we look at agriculture, it's mixed. We've lost, in terms of sheer numbers, farms, particularly the dairy sector, which is by far the largest. Exactly.
And you've seen the consolidation of smaller farms into these giant mega
Exactly.
farms.
So the number of farms at the dairy level has gone down, but the size of them has, on average, gone up. We have better news on the local foods front. Some numbers about farmers markets. In 2009, there were 6 active in St. Lawrence County, and this year we had 16. And 13 of those accepted SNAP, or as many people are familiar with that program, food stamps. CSAs, Community Supported Agriculture, which I should probably describe a little bit for folks who aren't familiar. Community Supported Agriculture is a direct marketing model that farmers use to connect the eaters, the consumers, with their own farm. So when you join a CSA, you typically pay the farmer up front in the spring for a share. And in exchange, throughout the growing season, you get either a delivery or you go to the farm or farmer's market to get your produce on a weekly basis, typically. And what that does is it helps the local farmer predict their market. It helps get them the infusion of funds when they need it at the beginning of the season for seed and other things. And it also raises the awareness of the eater about what's in season when. What are the challenges of farming? Most CSA farmers will provide a newsletter or an email to their members to let them know what's going on. Oh, you know, some kind of pest has come in, and so we're not going to have as much broccoli, or we're experiencing late blight, so the tomatoes are going to be fewer, what have you. And so it really raises the consciousness of the consumer as well. It's really a win-win for building the local food system. And when I arrived in Potsdam in 2000, there was one CSA operating in the area. And they actually left to go to another part of the, I think they went to the Hudson Valley for more favorable growing conditions. But over the last decade and a half, we've seen the CSA movement really flourish here. And this year, in the local food guide, GardenShare listed 13 CSAs in St. Lawrence County alone, and many more in our neighboring counties and across the North Country. Now, many people might hear, oh, farmers markets, CSAs, you know, it's too expensive to buy my food there. And in fact, 2 things are actually true. In many cases, lots of items are very competitively priced with the grocery stores, especially in the growing seasons at farmers markets. And definitely access is an issue with CSAs if you need to come up with the money all at once in advance. So a couple of things have been implemented to help get access for everyone to these wonderful ways of getting food. One, most of the farmers markets in St. Lawrence County are now equipped with EBT machines. So folks who get SNAP, food stamps, EBT, can use their card, swipe it there, get tokens, and use those tokens at the individual booths with farmers. Now, farmers report that this has increased their sales, so that's supporting our local farmers in a tremendous way. It's helping low-income families get healthier, fresher foods on their tables. As far as CSA goes, there are CSAs that are set up so they can take SNAP using those cards throughout the season And GardenShare also has a program called Bonus Bucks, where just through charitable donations, we have been able to get people subsidies of CSA shares that pay up front to make CSAs affordable for low-income families. So again, that's benefiting our local farmers, benefiting our low-income neighbors.
And the other thing, of course, it does is it makes us more food self-sufficient, which should always be the goal. It doesn't do anybody any good to have your salad travel 3,000 miles to get to your house if you have bought from.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the freshness is definitely going to be compromised somewhere over that 3,000-mile trip.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you mentioned year-round, and I want to say that, one, there are CSAs that are operating year-round now, and we also have farmers markets that are operating year-round, where you can access, more of the root vegetables, things like that, and canned goods. One of them happens here at Clarkson,
right,
throughout the winter months, and you can go to GardenShare.org and find listings of farmers markets that operate in winter.
And the other thing that I think we've also seen is that a lot of CSAs started out more as the vegetable and produce side, and we've slowly seen them also begin to add the meat products,
Yes.
beef and lamb and chicken and
Exactly.
whatnot. So that is also expanding that access to good high quality food that hasn't traveled too far, and particularly now with all of the meat recalls and the scares that you hear in the news about some of these big feedlot type operations, the quality can be a real issue nationally.
Absolutely.
So.
And not just meat, all kinds of other things, eggs, maple syrup, cheeses. I belong to a CSA, and they're year-round. I get jam, I get pickles, I get syrup, I get frozen fruits and veggies in the winter, such as corn and cherry tomatoes and peppers. And so a lot of our farmers are also, in conjunction, with help from Cooperative Extension and others, doing a lot to extend their growing seasons.
Right.
They're building high tunnels. They're doing greenhouses, and so we're seeing a real flourishing, and it needs more support.
Yeah, and it's this is not, of course, just in St. Lawrence County. This is really a trend nationally. Many more people are concerned about where their food comes from and how far it has to travel. So we're really well placed here because with our 4 colleges, each one of them is working on some of these sustainability issues and energy issues. So it's really it's an exciting time, I think, to be in these things. One of the parts of your report that I don't want to run out of time before we get to are the conclusions and the recommendations that you drew, because once you understand what the scope of the problem is, one of the things that we know is that poverty is big business for some companies. They actually have found ways to make money because once the federal government starts throwing money at something, people start saying, oh, look, this could be an income source for us. So creating these local sustainable operations actually keeps the money circulating within the community instead of it being taken away. So what do you see as some of the things that we can do moving forward in a public policy sense to improve the local food picture?
Okay, so there's 2 prongs to this. First of all, what's already happening and what needs to be helped along. If you are food insecure, you basically have 2 sources of help. One are government-supported programs like food stamps, EBT, SNAP, like WIC, which is for women, infants, and children, some programs for the elderly and disabled, and so on. But then, and then there's school food programs as well. The other side are these charitable programs in the nonprofit sector that have just exploded, literally, since the 1980s, when the poverty rates started rising again. And you have this incredible outpouring of effort at feeding our neighbors. People don't want their neighbors and their children going hungry. SNAP is really the most vital one, and currently about 15,000 people in St. Lawrence County, that's more than 1 in 10, are being helped by this. But it's not even everyone who's eligible. Many more people are eligible. And in many cases, they're not getting this resource because they don't think they're eligible when they actually are.
You know, just as an aside there, one of the populations that nobody ever thinks about is actually college students. Many college students kind of fall through the cracks of a lot of these programs. The assumption is if you have enough money to go to college, you're set. But of course, with the increasing costs of college and people perhaps being in places where they don't have that family support, it's not always the case that they are able to feed themselves well or adequately.
And you know, that ties in with this next thing that I was going to talk about, these programs in our communities. The college campuses are starting to run little food pantries for their students. And this is happening across the country. This is lunacy, in my opinion. There's an amazing book called Sweet Charity, Emergency Food and the End of Entitlement by sociologist Janet Poppendieck that traces this explosion of emergency food programs, food pantries largely, and free will meals and things like that, which we have many of in this county. But they have had to step up because our social safety net is not operating well. And in terms of the policy recommendations, we need to increase, first of all, the minimum wage. Most people who can't afford food for themselves are either already employed, or they're disabled, or they're a child.
Right.
And
we're not quite ready to put our kids out to work yet.
No. And so we need a living wage. Minimum wage does not pull people out of poverty. That's the most important thing. Short of giving people the wages they need to feed themselves appropriately and with dignity, then we need to increase that social safety net, increase access to food stamps, most vitally. Increase access to school food programs. Right. If you talk to the school food directors around the county, you will learn that they are struggling to feed the kids. Federal reimbursement is not really enough for the meals that are provided, but also many kids who are eligible are not getting those things.
Right. Heather, I hate to say this to you, but our time is up. And we've had such a great conversation and obviously only touched the surface of some of the things in your report. So thank you for coming in, and we'll do this again and complete the thing. So thank you. These conversations are a production of North Country Matters, produced here in the studios of WCKN on the campus of Clarkson University. This show is a civic collaboration between the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, and the Communication and Media Department of Clarkson University. Until next time, please remember, our North Country matters. Thank you. Sorry we ran out of time.